Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something, well, pretty ambitious. We've got source material on a brand new psychological framework. It's called Mirrored Psychic Inversion Theory, or MPIT for short.
And it is ambitious. It's proposing a really integrated model of the psyche.
Exactly. The sources claim it offers a kind of structural blueprint we haven't quite seen before, and it all seems to center on this core idea, the organizing gate.
hmm And the gate's operation is defined by three modes of what they call the anticipatory stress reflex, the ASR.
Right, so we got the organizing gate and this ASR system.
But what's really interesting, I think, isn't just the new terms, it's the integration they're aiming for.
Yeah.
MPIT is trying to consciously bridge psychodynamic thinking. You know, Fairbairn, Klein, even back to Freud with really current neuroscience.
Like predictive coding and interoception, Friston, Seth, that crowd.
Exactly that. Predictive coding, interoceptive neuroscience people like Craig, Critchley, it's trying to give, let's say, a neurosymbolic grounding to
Yeah.
concepts that have often stayed quite metaphorical.
Okay, so that brings us straight to the big question, really, the one for you listening. MPIT is positioning itself as major progress. So does this new architecture, this organizing gate, does it actually give us that unified principle? Does it structurally map out those classic ideas?
You mean like Freud's unconscious or Jung's shadow, Fairbairn's internal objects?
Yeah, exactly. Have we potentially found a working blueprint here? That's what we need to explore.
Okay, well, to do that, we absolutely have to start with the mechanism itself, the ASR system.
And the sources are really clear on this. It's not just reacting to stress from outside, it's described as a preconscious gate.
Yes, and that preconscious bit is, well, it's everything. The ASR is presented as constantly evaluating, filtering, organizing, everything coming in.
Everything, like feelings, body sensations, relational stuff.
All of it. Effective, interoceptive relational stimuli before it hits your conscious awareness. Think of it like the traffic controller for your internal world.
Okay. So it dictates whether you see reality clearly or if you need to sort of defensively distort it.
That's the idea. Whether the self reflects the world accurately or if survival logic twists the reflection.
And this gate, this ASR system, has three modes or components, the ASR triad. Let's start with the first one, which sounds pretty intense. ASR1, the annihilatory stress response.
Yeah, ASR1, you could call it somatic ground zero. It's framed as this very early, infantile, pre-symbolic state. It comes from severely unregulated relational misattunement.
Meaning the caregiver just couldn't soothe the infant's distress.
Couldn't regulate the system,
Wow.
yes. And the infant's body registers that failure not just as bad, but as, well, the source uses the phrase psychic death not as metaphor, but as bodily truth. It's an absolute terror, physiologically felt.
Wow. Okay, physiologically, how does that work? How does the body encode that level of threat?
So the theory links this to research on things like right hemisphere development and interoceptive prediction errors. Think Lenadell's work, for example.
Hmm.
Basically, this primal experience shapes the body's deepest prediction about the world. I am not safe. And this gets baked in before the cognitive mind, for language, has a chance to process it differently. It's a body-level certainty.
Okay, so if ASR1 is that ground zero terror, then ASR2 must be the opposite, the goal.
Exactly. ASR2 is the healthy, mature function. It's the healthy gate, if you like. This is the state where the organizing gate successfully scaffolds your sense of self.
And what does that allow for?
Crucially, it allows for what MPIT calls symbolic ambivalence, which is just a way of saying you can handle complexity. You can hold mixed feelings, love and frustration toward the same person, for instance, without your sense of self or the relationship feeling like it's going to disintegrate.
So it enables reflection, delaying reaction, testing reality properly.
All of that. Symbolic delay, reflective processing, genuine psychological reality testing. That's ASR2 working well.
Right. Which brings us to the third mode, ASR3. This happens when the healthy gate fails. This is the anticipatory shadow reflex. The shadow reflex.
Yes. The shadow reflex is framed as the system's maladaptive inversion. It's described as a defensive, almost dissociative fantasy state that activates when ASR2 collapses and that primal ASR1 fear surges back.
So it's purely about survival.
Entirely. It's built around anticipating threat and avoiding annihilation at all costs. And its core motive, this is a key phrase in the source, is symbolic invisibility, reflexive self-erasure.
Symbolic invisibility. Can you unpack that a bit? Does that mean sort of disappearing yourself in relationships, always guessing what the other person wants or expects?
That's precisely it. You're filtering the world constantly through this internal threat logic. You're performing acceptance or compliance or whatever seems necessary to avoid triggering that ASR1 terror again.
So you're erasing your own authentic self, your own truth, to try and stay safe.
Exactly. It's becoming what is required, even if that feels completely false internally.
Okay, so we have the structure. ASR1, ground zero, ASR2, the healthy gate, and ASR3, the shadow reflex. Now let's circle back to that central claim. Does this ASR architecture actually provide a structural map for those big psychological concepts we mentioned earlier?
Well, that's the core argument of MPIT. It claims to provide a neurosymbolic anchor. Let's take Fairbairn's internal object world or Klein's concept of annihilatory anxiety.
These ideas about internalizing bad objects or feeling a terrifying sense of falling apart?
Right. Powerful ideas, but often quite metaphorical. MPIT argues ASR1 gives them a concrete grounding. The bad object is internalized, yes, but the theory specifies that the deepest level of this internalization is somatic.
Back to the body.
Back to the body's first deepest prediction error. I am not safe. It takes that abstract object relations idea and roots it in, well, eventually measurable interceptive processing. It tries to specify where the bad object is encoded in the body's core safety predictions.
That is a significant shift from description to potential location. Okay, what about Jung's shadow or Winnicott's false self? They often feel related.
They do. MPIT specifically links ASR3, the shadow reflex, to the architecture of Winnicott's false self.
How so?
ASR3 is described as that survival mirroring structure. It's built to anticipate threat, perform acceptance, constantly mirror what it thinks others need to see. That maps very directly onto Winnicott's idea of the defensive, unauthored self, the part that gives up authenticity for relational survival.
And you mentioned earlier this ties into narcissistic dynamics.
It does seem to. The source material connects this ASR3 structure to how narcissistic injury plays out and certain survival strategies. It mentions Vaknin's idea of snapshotting, freezing the self into a required image to prevent the ASR3 system from collapsing entirely under pressure. It's that constant defensive performance.
So ASR3 isn't just any trauma response. It's proposed as the actual structure of the self built around trauma. Okay, now the biggest one, Freud's unconscious, that huge background filtering system. How does the ASR model claim to improve on that?
That's a bold claim, obviously. MPIT suggests the ASR system is the structural plumbing for the function Freud identified. It performs that preconscious filtering and organizing, but it integrates modern ideas, particularly Friston's free energy principle.
The idea that the brain is always predicting, trying to minimize surprise.
Exactly. And MPIT suggests trauma happens when the mismatch between prediction and reality becomes symbolically unbearable. The ASR system then is proposed as the map showing where meaning breaks down, right at that gate between raw input and symbolic interpretation.
So moving from Freud's descriptive concept to a potentially functional, maybe even testable neurosymbolic system.
That seems to be the goal.
Okay, if the organizing gate is so central, let's focus on what happens when it fails. The consequences, especially in relational trauma. MPIT calls this symbolic collapse.
Right, so when the healthy gate ASR2 fails under pressure and that ASR1 terror reactivates, the person gets locked into the ASR3 shadow reflex state. That capacity for symbolic complexity, for holding ambiguity, it just shatters.
And there's a term for the most acute version of this breakdown, CIPR.
Yes, collapse-induced psychotic regression. It's described as a temporary but very acute breakdown. Ego functions, reality testing, even the sense of coherent narrative self can fragment. But the sources stress this is driven by symbolic overload, by the ASR3 defense failing, not what we typically call persistent psychosis.
It's ASR3 becoming overwhelmed and incoherent.
Precisely. A survivor in that state might experience intense derealization, maybe affective blackouts, a feeling of their identity completely shattering, especially under severe relational stress.
That sounds incredibly frightening. And the theory says ASR3 maintains the state through something called the Hall of Mirrors.
Yes, the Hall of Mirrors is the term used for the psychic structure ASR3 maintains. It describes a state where each relational object is a reflection of the last, and no authentic contact can occur. Meaning, because the self is operating under ASR3's threat detection rules, you're forced to constantly perform safety. You end up relating not to the actual person in front of you, but to your internalized projections of past threats or anticipated judgments. Every interaction becomes a reflection of that core unsafety.
And the really tragic outcome, according to the sources, is that the survivor can become reflexively self-invalidating. The original threat might be long gone, but the internal ASR3 gate keeps demanding the performance. They call this inverted ASR2.
Well, it really reframes things clinically. Symptoms we often see like chronic self-blame, difficulty with boundaries, dissociative loops. MPIT views these not as inherent flaws or weaknesses,
But
as gate-triggered survival performances,
Mhm.
actions and states that were encoded under extreme coercion to ensure survival. The ASR3 structure learned that script and just keeps running it automatically, even when the danger isn't present anymore.
So, if survival for this system means symbolic invisibility, performing safety, what does recovery actually look like through this MPIT lens?
Recovery is framed as symbolic reclamation. The work is to consciously dismantle that ASR3 shadow reflex structure and actively reconstruct the healthy gate, ASR2.
How do you do that?
It involves moving attention away from those outer mirrors, the constant scanning for threat, the shame spirals, the internalized critical voices, and back towards what MPIT calls the vertical axis of authenticity.
The vertical axis of authenticity.
Yeah, it represents reconnecting with one's own genuine internal reality, where your own felt sense, your truth, becomes the primary source of meaning again, rather than the anticipated reactions of others. Rebuilding trust in your own internal signals.
Okay, this has definitely been a deep dive into a complex structural model. The main takeaway seems to be that this organizing gate SR system is offered as a structural map, not just descriptive. It attempts to locate where psychological breakdown happens, right at that threshold between body level processing and symbolic meaning.
I think that's right. By trying to bridge object relations, developmental neuroscience, predictive processing, MPIT offers a schema attempting to unify these fields. It lays out a possible mechanism for how that symbolic inversion of the false self built by ASR3 gets constructed under duress.
And importantly, how symbolic reintegration might happen.
Exactly, how rebuilding the true authored self could be structurally possible by restoring the functionality of that healthy gate, ASR2. It offers a potential pathway back to authenticity.
It certainly gives a stark picture of relational trauma's impact. So, if the core of recovery, as MPIT suggests, is reclaiming symbolic freedom, that ability to think, feel, and choose without that constant internal surveillance from ASR3, here's a thought to leave you with. What might be the clearest sign in your own life right now that your internal healthy gate, your ASR2, is functioning well and allowing you that freedom? Thank you for exploring this complex territory with us today. We'll see you next time.